I'll be wearing my new boots. Grief, I hope you are.
Okay. Good evening. Good evening and welcome to the October 17th, 2017 City Council regular meeting. I'm Deputy Mayor Debbie Bertland, sitting in for Mayor Bassett, who's out of town this week. The council's just concluded an executive session and will now be moving on to special business. So the first item of special business is Mercer Island Fire Department's citizen recognition, and I'm going to just immediately turn it over to Chief Heitman.
Good evening, Council. For the record, Steve Heitman, your fire chief. In the fire service, we often get recognized as heroes while fulfilling our mission to save lives and property. So it is an exciting moment tonight. We get the opportunity to recognize a citizen for having the courage to act in a life-saving situation and truly make a difference. On June 26, 2017, Dr. Michael Brooks, a psychiatrist, was eating in a local coffee shop when he heard a mother's plea for help because her son, was choking. Dr. Brooks stepped in without hesitation, grabbed the child, and performed the Heimlich maneuver on a 4-year-old boy, which is not that simple, who it turns out was choking on a carrot that his mother had given him. Although 911 had been called and Mercer Island was responding to the incident, time was of the essence, and Dr. Brooks' immediate action saved the life of this child. His willingness to get involved, coupled with his previous training in a public CPR class, gave him the wherewithal and ability to perform this heroic act. Training in citizen CPR, which includes the removal of a foreign body airway obstruction, aka choking, is a vital skill that all citizens should have. So on behalf of the Mercer Island Fire Department and the City of Mercer Island, I'd like to present an award of appreciation to Dr. Michael Brooks for being a hero and saving a life. Dr. Brooks would like to say a couple of things.
Part of the deal was I would get to say a few words. So when I was thinking about this, I was first trained to do that when I was probably 19, a long time ago, before medical school, anything like that. And I just think this should be something that we all know how to do. It should be just an ordinary life skill. And whatever we can do to promote that, I'm all in favor of it. Thanks.
Well, a tremendous thanks from us here at the council as well. It's these are the good stories that we like to hear coming from the fire department. So thanks very much.
Thank you for the time.
I'm going to thank our 2 engine companies for coming out
yes,
too.
The full department seems to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, well, that concludes special business for tonight. Next up is the city manager's report. Welcome, City Manager Julie Underwood.
Good evening, Council. Just want to make you aware we're still seeking applicants for our Financial Challenges Community Advisory Group. If you're interested, the deadline is October 27th. And appointments we're hoping will take place the week of October 30. I thought I'd share with you a little bit of how we are really looking at all of the applicants for this process. We have a outside facilitator who will help facilitate that process. She is actually calling every single applicant, so interviewing every single applicant. And then I've asked for a subcommittee of our leadership team. That would include Kirsten Taylor, our Assistant City Manager, Cindy Goodwin, our YFS Director, Bruce Fletcher, our Parks and Rec Director, and then our Police Chief, Ed Holmes, to then review the applications, review the interview notes, and then make a recommendation to me of who I should appoint for the committee. As I'm still somewhat getting familiar with the island, I thought it would be best to enlist their advice on this. We have our first CAG meeting on Wednesday, November 15th, and that meeting is really designed to come together, get to know one another, review our charter, our purpose, ground rules, and and the timeline. And it's really not meant to get into a lot of detail. It's really just setting up the purpose for the CAG. All CAG meetings, of course, will be announced and published and open to all. And then you can, anyone can find information on our city's website if you go to mercergov.org/financial challenges. Oh, I want to thank our community for participating last Wednesday in our first ever telephone town hall. So what happened is at the 7 o'clock hour, our vendor called, I want to say, over 4,000 phone numbers. So they have phone lists, and they called over 4,000. And, you know, a number of those calls don't get answered and that sort of thing. But what we track is what happens over that 60 minutes. And so the first 3 to 5 minutes, we had about 250 participants. What was neat is by the end of the call, 60 minutes, we still had roughly 100 participants still on the call. We asked a number of polling questions, and let me just be clear, it's not scientific survey. So it's about 100 people taking the poll, but 68% agreed with the statement that the city is providing about the right amount of services. One of the things that we enjoyed about this is it's using old technology in a new way. We were able to learn our residents' initial reactions to some of those polling questions and also learn what questions they had. Anyone can go back and listen to the recording, and you can find that on the city's website. And if you don't mind, I'll just recap some of the polling results. We asked the question, would you favor paying more property taxes to maintain services? You'll see there about 42% agreed with that statement, and 50% did not, and 8% don't know. We asked, okay, would you prefer scaling back services or programs and increase in property taxes? About 49% someone agreed, so you could see that kind of aligns with that last question, and about 42% disagreed and continued. 8% don't know. Would you favor paying more property taxes for capital projects and deferred maintenance? 45% agreed with that statement, and 42% did not. And we asked the question, was in helping learn about the city's financial challenges, was the town hall helpful? Resounding 94% thought it was very helpful and useful. Should we hold these again for other important issues? 95% said yes, we should definitely do that. And then this is the one chart I find really, I'm really proud of, the fact that 72%, they were already aware of the city's financial budgetary challenges. So again, we have a super engaged, super plugged in community. And I think also we're doing a really good job, pretty good job, letting our community know about it. So that's it. Any questions about that? We're envisioning doing another one probably as we go through that community advisory group process. Sometime in the, maybe March or April timeframe, we'll do another one to help inform the CAG. This is old news, but I thought I'd mention this again, that Micah had proposed zoning text amendment. The Planning Commission originally had a public hearing for this Wednesday. I have asked Micah if they would postpone that and actually work with the city on identifying some alternative locations. They have agreed to do that. I don't know the locations at the moment. We're still in a very exploratory and not really at a place where we can talk through that. But obviously that's going to be something you all, the community, is really interested in learning more about. And as soon as we can, we will obviously let the community know. I've seen some emails about sites that I'm pretty sure the council had explored in the past, like the community center. And so I'm not sure, again, those are things, Freshie, these are all sites that are kind of out there, people are buzzing about. But again, we haven't identified any sites at the moment that we're working with Micah on. Okay. Let's protect the environment. So fall recycling event is happening this Saturday, 9 to 3. There's a whole list of things that you can bring to this event to recycle and hopefully divert from the landfill. We also have a medicine take back on Saturday, October 28th. Again, we don't want to see these things flushed down our toilets or put in our landfills. So this is a great way to dispose of safely medicines. And really cool to see these recycling bins in our town center. They're actually made out of recycled material, and there are 4 locations that are being piloted, and pretty much almost, to me, the number one thing that we can take in those are coffee cups and lids. So we can take those. You can put those in the recycling box, as well, of course, aluminum cans, plastic bottles, and that sort of thing. Really proud of the fact, 22 years in a row, we've had clean audits. And for those of you who don't know, an audit really assesses how the city manages and uses our resources and determines our financial statements are accurate and complete. If you'd like to view that audit, it's available on the Washington State Auditor's website. And then finally, emergency preparedness. This is a workshop being hosted for our North End businesses, helping them to prepare for emergencies and disasters. It's happening this Wednesday. There's 2 sessions, one at 9 and one at 6 p.m., and it's at our fire station in the town center. And if you're interested, please RSVP with Jennifer Franklin. So that's all I have.
Council, any questions for Julie?
Is there, with the telephone survey, is there a way to have people opt into the city communication like the weekly if they're not already getting it, by pressing a 1 or?
And we didn't do that. That I know we had the moderator talk about getting signed up for the MI Weekly, but that could be something we can look at in the future. You mean if they're interested, if they're not already subscribing, stay on the line to be.
If you had 27% that didn't know we had a financial challenge and they joined a financial challenge conference call, that subset, maybe it's 27 people, I would think, are
not getting the MI.
Weekly. Yeah.
Or not reading it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, thank you, Julie. Our next item of business is appearances. This is the opportunity for anyone to speak to the City Council on any item. Please come forward, give us your name and address for the record, and please limit your comment to 3 minutes. Do note that the expanded rules regarding public comment are hanging on the chamber doors if you need further explanation. So please line up. Please come on forward. Don't be shy.
Good evening. My name is Sue Stewart, 3205 84th Avenue Southeast, Mercer. Deputy Mayor Debbie Bertlin and council members. Money Magazine's listing of Mercer as one of the top 100 communities to live in the United States was pretty exciting to see. I agree, and I'm sure you do too. You still have complex issues, but what a nice compliment. I'm here both as a citizen and president of Friends of Luther Burbank Park to simply ask for your continued support of the land use map amendment in the comprehensive plan to be voted on December 5th. That will change West Hill, nicknamed Kite Hill, from public facility to park. The council voted unanimously in September of 2016 for that docket item. The Planning Commission voted unanimously October 4th, so just 13 days ago, to support that change. Yet one commissioner asked me, what park uses would I accept on West Hill? What construction? Which made me realize she wasn't aware that a plan exists on page 20 of the Luther Burbank Park Master Plan. I offered the page, realizing it was 11 years ago that that master plan was unanimously approved by that sitting city council. I've brought copies of page 20, a lot of paperwork that goes into 11 years of city work, so that you could read what it says. And I'm not asking that you fund the plan, only that you realize that there has always been a specific plan that does exist. It envisions West Hill to be a, and I quote, highlight of the park and an icon for Mercer Island, an iconic park spot in one of the best cities in the United States. Pretty special. I have a pea patch about 200 feet north of West Hill, so I spend many hours in that part of the park, and I just wanted to share that many people already use that part of the park and enjoy that beautiful view. So I'm just here to support your past work and to nudge it along in what I think is going to be an easy approval. So thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else? Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Leon Cohen, 9219 Southeast 33rd Place, Mercer Island. Good evening, Deputy Mayor and council members. As a resident of our island and a member of the Historic Society, I know this property on 24th and 76 can be used for a far better use and would benefit our community and residents as a whole. In keeping with some of the Resident Planning Commission deliberations, I too have said many times in the future that if there's a future development at this gateway corner, it should incorporate gateway elements to emphasize the entrance to town center, remembering that this is our last gateway into the town center and should be utilized, enhanced, and developed to compel pedestrian access from just across the street from Lidtop or soon to be the light rail station 1,000 lineal feet to the east. Potentially, this gateway could have bronze statues, waterfalls, connecting circulating pools, seating, sidewalk cafes, and adorned by landscaping, all to create a true sense of arrival and a resting conjugation setting. Before entering into the town center, it would be nice to have that, or at town center edge. You may recall the comprehensive plan calls for the plazas and sidewalk concourses to be compelling and bring folks into town center from the outside. Other potential community benefits are if someday forward the subject was combined with the neighbor Freshie location, the following potential schemes, to name a few, could be contemplated. The property could be put on the King County property tax roll. This helps our schools, our district, and city and state and city B&O taxes could be generated. The city could also earn building and planning permit processing fees. There could be 75 to 165 commuter parking stalls that could be provided for exclusive use of islanders, a community goal. A potential home for Micah up to 24,000 square feet could be provided, a long-time concern of our community. A luxury condominium or luxury apartment homes could be provided, high-end retail, restaurant, microbrewery, or winery potential. A home for Mercer Island's Historic Society. Let's try to get them out of the basement that they're in now because they deserve a street presence. As you're aware, your staff has recommended passing the amendment. By doing so, the city will have many good options to deal with and be able to stay in control. If they don't pass it, the Freshie site has its right-of-way access and will be developed into a mixed-use project, thus leaving the corner grass area on two busy streets, not big enough for a child to throw a ball in fear that it might end up in the street. Should you have any questions always or need clarifications, I'm always available. Feel free to contact me anytime. Thank you very much for your guidance and untiring city service efforts. Sincerely.
Thank you.
Ira Appleman, 90390 Shorewood. The City Council should rezone the property next to the Cohen property as town center. It's more of a parking strip than a park and would be a public nuisance if used as a park because of the danger of children running into the street. I'm not privy to the City Council's plans, but Leon Cohen is the most patient man on the island. He's been working on a project for nearly 10 years, and change of designation to town TC just makes negotiations with Leon and or others possible. Second, the Sound Transit settlement is the greatest betrayal of Islanders in the history of Mercer Island. In 2005, Islanders were promised by the City Council and our regional partners, including Sound Transit, that we would get single-occupant vehicle access to the outer bridge deck HOV lanes as we had to the center lanes. The settlement agreement represents a complete loss of that access. I object to the putting lipstick on a pig way the staff has dressed up the agenda bill 5346. I've been involved with the Sound Transit projects of the bridge, park and ride, and train station since 1997 when they began. I don't have time here to describe the history of those projects, but in your 2 years of negotiations with Sound Transit, you should have done due diligence to determine what you were negotiating over. Much of the specified mitigation would have had to be done anyway by Sound Transit, even without this agreement. The permanent parking requires the city to contribute $4 to $5 million. Where are you going to get that? The City Council's capitulation to Sound Transit in this agreement essentially terminates the 1976 memorandum agreement that protected the island for so many years. In voting for this settlement, our King County representative said that everyone got what they wanted except Mercer Island. Any council member voting for this agreement is joining with Sound Transit to betray the island, and you can't say that you didn't know. Third, Tim Iman is sponsoring an initiative that would return car tabs to $30, denying Sound Transit its ill-gained funds by misleading the public. I'm providing this information for informational purposes only. I caution council members and staff against misrepresenting my words, that in any way I'm recommending that Islanders stick it to the man by joining Iman's efforts against Sound Transit. Iman's website is www.voterswantmorechoices.com. Go to the website, you decide whether you want to send a message to Sound Transit. www.voterswantmorechoices.com.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Good evening, Al Lippert, 4052 94th Avenue Southeast. I'm reading a statement for Lisa Odegaard, who could not make it tonight. A question to the town hall meeting was as follows. In regards to the city's responsible use of funds, the question was, if our city is treading water financially, why are dipping into funds set aside for another purpose as a safeguard, and why is the current council even entertaining any discussion with a private entity, MICA, to lease any space on Mercer Island for $1 a year for the next 80 years? How is this fiscally responsible? That was the end of her question. I actually think I know the answer to this, but I do wonder why the city has agreed to spend city resources, which I guess eventually costs money, to help a private entity do research. They should be doing this on their own. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Robin Russell. I live at 7549 Southeast 29th Street. Thank you, Julie Underwood and City Council, for your support in postponing or pausing the MICA zoning text amendment. As both a Mercerdale Park and arts supporter, I see this as a win-win for all parties. I applaud the courage this may have taken to step back and reassess the appropriate location for a performing arts organization. My sincere hope is that a better and more appropriate space can be found so that our public parks and open space can remain as park space and not become a building space for this or any other future development. During this pause, I would request that the public and citizens of Mercer Island also be included in discussions along with the city and MICA. The letter from Julie and MICA's response refers to a partnership with the city and MICA, and the citizens are not mentioned. If MICA is going to be a public benefit for all citizens, and if tax dollars are going to be expended for this project, we deserve to have a right to be included in these discussions. I think one reason the Arts Center and location has become so divisive in the community is that citizens feel they have become disenfranchised. Many proposals, such as restriping 77th Street and renaming the Parks and Recreation Department to Parks and Arts, have had the appearance of being a subterfuge to get MICA built in Mercerdale. This may or may not have been the case, but as we all know, impressions often mean everything. During the election, I have heard the word transparency more times than I can count. So much so that when candidates are elected, we will be able to see through them. I would ask, though, and in fact beg, that the current council and city please begin applying transparency to this pause and negotiations going forward. We all want this art center to be successful, but if the citizens are not included and left to go by rumors and distorted facts, then no one wins. Let's make transparency and inclusiveness a part of the Mercerdale Park, City of Mercer Island, and MICA conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else for public appearances? Please go ahead and line on up if you're going to speak tonight.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor and Council members. My name is Jason Rogers. I live at 2283 78th Avenue Southeast, right behind the Park and Ride. I'm here tonight to talk about the Sound Transit Settlement Agreement a little bit. I'd like to start by saying that we in the neighborhood north of I-90 and around the Park and Ride really appreciate the city's efforts, and especially MIPD's efforts with the enforcement of the residential parking district and making sure that our neighborhood has not been badly impacted after the closure of the center roadway, and of course the effect on the Park and Ride filling up earlier in the morning than it used to. But that leads me into some concerns that the settlement agreement has a roundabout at 77th and North Mercer in it. When we saw this back in May, when the council decided to accept Sound Transit settlement offer, this was a little dismaying to many of us because the bus turnaround options had all been taken off the table fairly explicitly prior to that, and then to see them come back, with very little notice was, as I said, a little dismaying. Recognizing that that's something Sound Transit really, really wants, and that there's another option on the table which would not have required the acquisition of probably two homes, our neighbors. That's not something we like to see. These are two families that are going to probably lose their homes so that we can build a bus turnaround. If that can't be changed, what we're looking to do is that the settlement agreement seems very light on protections for the neighborhood and specifics about this roundabout, other than saying it's this one option with a few modifications. Specifically, there's not a whole lot in there that says what the city's role is in helping design and approve this roundabout. There's nothing, it's Sound Transit will have to submit permits and get the approvals, but that's as far as it goes. So we'd like to see some more strength on that. Second of all, we need some additional protections for the neighborhood. If we lose these two homes, these homes, admittedly, they're right on North Mercer. They have a lot of traffic noise, but they're buffering the rest of the neighborhood. They're providing a visual buffer and a sound buffer. If we lose that, that's going to then spill further into the neighborhood. Sound Transit's own analysis in the supplemental SEPA documentation says that under FTA and FHWA analysis, there are no noise or visual impacts. That may be under the standard, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to be impacted anyway, because we're going to see it more, we're going to hear it more, even if it's still below the threshold for some additional protections. Finally, we're very concerned about safety, especially for bikes and pedestrians at that intersection. As you know, there's a non-motorized connection from 78th and 24th that goes through to North Mercer and 77th. We have been very impressed with the additional safety provided by the light that's now there. That light's probably going away with the roundabout. We're concerned about how people are going to interact with the roundabout. If the light goes away, are people going to be, feel unsafe trying to cross North Mercer? And that's only going to pick up when the light rail station comes in. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Gary Robinson, 6026 East Mercer Way. As I sat here listening to all this, it occurred to me. For the past 30 or 40 years, the City Council has been trying to do something with Mercerdale Park. It just seems that you have a habit that you can't shake, that you just can't see all of that open space there without putting something on it. You'd almost think you're developers, right? Every developer seeing an open space thinks of what they can do with it. This may have no merit whatsoever, but I would suggest that you consider putting Mercerdale Park into the Open Space Conservancy Trust. That will remove the temptation, and it will make everything a lot better for everyone, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, folks, if we do have any more public comment, let's go ahead and line up.
Good evening, Erica Franklin, 2283 78th Avenue Southeast. And I just wanted to read a statement from Michelle Goldberg, who couldn't be here tonight. Dear council members, sorry I won't be able to attend tonight's meeting and hear the discussion regarding the Sound Transit settlement. I do have a few thoughts that I'd like to share. Thank you. First, my neighbors and I greatly appreciate the care that has been taken to amp up enforcement of the residential parking district in our neighborhood. The various departments, especially the MIPD, have done an admirable job of protecting our neighborhood from overflow commuters, and we thank you for that. Second, that being said, we seem to be facing a new concern, the proposed roundabout at 77th Avenue and its potential impact on our neighborhood. My first thought is that there doesn't seem to be anything in the settlement agreement that dictates who will control the design of the roundabout or its nearby features. Shouldn't there be something in writing that gives the City of Mercer Island some control over what Sound Transit intends to build? Here are some design features at issue. Regarding the location of the roundabout, there was a discussion at the most recent Sound Transit open house that suggested that the roundabout could be shifted south toward the light rail station, thus possibly reducing the need to take the two houses. I don't know if this approach has been pursued, but I would encourage it. We were also told at this meeting that our streets, Southeast 24th Street and 70th Avenue Southeast, will not be connected to the roundabout or to North Mercer Way. Our neighborhood likes that our streets will be separated from the roundabout and North Mercer Way, and we hope that that remains true throughout the design process. We urge the City Council to push for this during discussions of the roundabout design. We also rely on you, our elected representatives, to protect our neighborhood from visual and auditory impacts of the roundabout. This is a great concern to us, especially if the two homes that currently help dampen the traffic and freeway noise are removed to build the roundabout. If the roundabout is built there, we hope that there will be some kind of attractive sound barrier built into the design. We would also appreciate your pushing for the greatest safety features in that area. Now that there's a traffic signal at 77th Avenue and North Mercer Way, those attempting to cross North Mercer Way are feeling much safer. I believe that the traffic signal will be removed once the roundabout is constructed, which will create a more dangerous intersection for those on foot or bike. Finally, I note that Sound Transit and the city have agreed to various restrictions regarding location for passenger pickup and drop-offs, the number of buses, and duration of bus idling. What happens if King County Metro does not agree to abide by those various restrictions? Thanks very much for your efforts. Michelle Goldberg, 2212 78th Avenue Southeast. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, if there's no one else, appearances are now closed. So the next item of business is the consent calendar, which contains payable reports and AB 5350 Freeman Avenue Roadway Repair Contract Award and AB 5351 Madrona Crest West Project Closeout. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion passes and the consent calendar is approved. So we now move to regular business, and the first item is AB 5348, a code amendment to prohibit animals on synthetic turf fields. This is the first reading, and welcome Park Superintendent Paul West.
For the record, Paul West, Parks Operations Superintendent. Good evening, council members and Deputy Mayor. This is hopefully a fairly straightforward ordinance. As you know, we're in the process of completing the Parks Department's first turf field on Parks property at Island Crest Park, which we expect to be done at the end of November. For public safety and health reasons, we recommend that animals be excluded from that turf field. which is detailed a little bit more in your agenda bill. Basically, sanitation is very difficult on a synthetic turf field because it's not a biological system. There's no way to break down wastes. And so this is an ordinance that basically excludes all animals from the turf field at all times. At the same time, there's a small update there as well, which would allow people with service animals to be on that field. So that's the gist of the ordinance. I would be glad to entertain any other questions about this ordinance.
Council have any questions? Benson?
Paul, can you describe, I mean, because this, obviously, you're talking about an outright ban on pets, with a few exceptions at all times. So can you describe the signage, and the public signage that will be at the field?
So we actually currently have a synthetic turf infield there, and we do have some signage currently. I think we would develop new signage for this new field because we were the existing signage was not in compliance with the ordinance, so it was more of a suggestion that dogs stay off the infield. With this sign, we would be able to cite the code, say no animals on this field. It would be very simple and straightforward, and that would hopefully allow then the police to enforce the code.
Can I just follow up? Can you describe the penalties for noncompliance?
Penalties for noncompliance are limited. The Officer Ormsby, who does the compliance work, says that informed me that she typically gives a warning for first offenders, and then the maximum ticket that she writes is $35. So it's a small ticket.
Are there any other questions? I do have one. So is the signage proposed then only for Island Crest Park, because the other turf fields we have are currently sited on school property? So will they be replicated even though it's almost redundant in a sense, or?
The school properties are already signed with the code that restricts animals from school property. Yeah.
So this will be assigned specific then pretty much to Island Crest Park?
It will be.
Okay. Dan? Okay. Great. Well, Council, we're open for discussion. Okay. It seems fairly non-controversial at this point. So if there
needs to be a motion before discussion.
I'll move to suspend Council Rules of Procedure 6.3, requiring a second reading of city ordinance, and adopt ordinance number 17C-2.
I think we should
one
do
at a time. Suspend.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Sorry.
Okay.
I have a really minor suggested amendment.
Okay.
It pertains to the
motion's just to suspend the rules.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. You're right.
Okay, so we're voting just to suspend the rules at this point. Is there any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Now we're moving on to the next one.
All right, I would move to adopt ordinance number 17C-25, amending Chapter 7.04 of the Mercer Island City Code to add turf fields as an unlawful place for domestic animals, with the exception of cats or service animals, to enter or remain upon.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, first and second. Discussion? Benson?
Okay, now, again, this is a very minor amendment. This pertains to the third whereas. Okay, so bear with me, okay? As I read it, and maybe you folks, maybe it reads well for you, I just found it a little awkward, okay? So, especially there's a clause where the second line has a reference to of a person with disability. And so, in any event, this is my proposed change, okay? And I shared this with Paul, and they were fine with it. But I would suggest or propose to amend the third whereas so it reads, Whereas in addition to cats, the exception should include surface animals that are trained for the purpose of assisting or accommodating a person with a sensory, mental, or physical disability. And that's it.
Okay, so we've had an amendment offered. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Would you, as they speak to it, but it seems like
It's hopefully self-explanatory, so maybe not.
Okay.
I move to adopt as amended.
All in favor? Wait.
You have a motion on the table, so you need to call for the vote for the amendment.
Okay, so we've already got the first and the second, so we will go ahead and just vote on that amendment.
Yes.
All right. All in favor of Councilmember Wong's amendment, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so now we return then to the original.
To the main motion as amended.
As amended. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. We are now done with animals on turf fields. So there we go.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Paul. We'll move on to the next item of regular business, which is AB 5349, Code Amendments regarding essential public facilities. This would be the potential second reading and adoption. Welcome, DSG. We have Evan and not Scott tonight. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. Of course, I'm Evan Maxim, the planning manager for the City of Mercer Island, pinch hitting for the moment for the Director of Development Services. This is, as you said, the second reading for the Essential Public Facilities Code Amendment. There were two changes that came out of the council review on October 3rd. These are incorporated into your revised exhibit. The first change was essentially excluding city projects from the definition of essential public facilities. And the second change, of course, was providing consistent descriptions of project sponsor, and applicant throughout the ordinance. Happy to answer any questions, but I believe this is a fairly straightforward amendment at this point, unless there are other items for me.
Are there any questions? Okay, in that case, I welcome a motion.
I move to adopt ordinance number 17C-20, amending chapters 19.06 and 19.16 of the Mercer Island City Code to provide for and regulate the siting of essential public facilities as required by the Growth Management Act.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All right, seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. We are clipping right along. Well done. Okay. So, thank you, Evan. We will now move on to the next item of regular business.
I know.
Which must be a relief after the marathons that you've been putting in lately. Well done. I hope you have a nice short evening here with us tonight. Anyway, the next item of regular business is AB 5359, the 2017 Comprehensive Plan Amendments and accompanying zoning code amendments. We have, again, Planning Manager Evan Maxim.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I hate to say it, I have a few slides on this one, so it might be slightly longer than your last two. These are the 2017 Comprehensive Plan amendments that the council put onto the docket for review last fall. We've gone through our Planning Commission process, and we're bringing their recommendation back to the City Council for your first reading tonight. What I thought I'd do this evening was just give you a brief overview of the amendments, the proposed amendments, and the criteria for approval. Move on to a discussion around the recommendation from the Planning Commission and the city staff related to those amendments, and then look to the council for direction around your second reading, which is currently scheduled for December 5th. With that, the council recall that the original resolution actually created 8 items on the docket, 3 of which have fallen off the docket in the last 12 months. The first of those was an update to the capital facilities plan to incorporate the Mercer Island School District's 6-year capital facilities plan into our comprehensive plan. When we got into the review of that particular item, we found that it was already incorporated by reference and no further action was required by the Planning Commission. Next two items, there was a placeholder to support your recently adopted residential development code changes. That was ultimately unnecessary, and that has been removed from the docket as well. And the last, of course, was a placeholder for comprehensive plan amendment to support the proposed amendments by the Mercer Island Center for the Arts. That application was withdrawn last March, April of this year, and has not moved forward from the Planning Commission. The Mercer Island Center for the Arts indicated that they did not believe a comprehensive plan amendment was necessary. So that left us with 5 amendments to consider. Of those 5 amendments, 3 of the amendments were relatively modest changes, if you will, to the text of the comprehensive plan. The first amendment, the first text amendment, was to update the introduction. This is on page 7 of your agenda bill, I believe under section 2. It's actually a reference to the section number in the ordinance. And all we're doing in this section is removing some language that is, at this point, out of date, if you will, in the comprehensive plan. That introductory language describes how to amend the comprehensive plan and the docketing process. The council actually adopted an ordinance which laid this out last fall in our code, and this language is no longer necessary in our comprehensive plan. The second amendment is on page 8 of the agenda bill under section 3, and this was an amendment to the land use element. It was creating a new policy supporting the creation of a trail between the south end of Luther Burbank Park up to the I-90 Lid Trail. I understand that this was a policy that was necessary to allow for the Washington Department of Transportation to discuss a possible easement with our Parks Department, and would let them move forward on the implementation of a portion of our Luther Burbank Master Plan. The last text amendment was actually repealing an appendix to our comprehensive plan. That would be Appendix B. The repeal language is very simple in the agenda bill. That Appendix B is a holdover from your comprehensive plan prior to the last update. And what Appendix D did is it described how the Mercer Island comprehensive plan was consistent with other regional transportation plans largely. So Regional Transit Authority at the time, King County Metro, Sound Transit, things of that nature. That language is actually already contained in your recently adopted, newly updated comprehensive plan. So Appendix B, again, became a redundant document. In providing an update or drafting an update for the Planning Commission, I found myself cutting and pasting out of the existing comprehensive plan to create an Appendix B. That seemed to be a wasted exercise, so ultimately we recommended appealing that appendix. There were 2 proposed comprehensive plan land use map amendments. The land use map, to remind the council, is the policy guidance that the city uses in establishing the actual zoning. So a land use map is not the same as the zoning map, but in our particular jurisdiction, it's very closely aligned. The first land use map change, of course, was the redesignation of Kite Hill, or West Hill, I've heard it referred to even this evening, from public facility to park. You can see that on page 7, both in section 1, this is the reference to the map, and then on page 10 of the agenda bill packet. What we're looking at there is really just a graphical change. If the council's interested, I can pull that up onto the screen so we can look at it together. And then the last proposed map amendment was related to the cone, what's referred to as the cone amendment. This is related to a piece of city-owned or city-controlled land at the southwest intersection of, I believe, Southeast 27th Street and 74th Avenue Southeast. This is both a land use map change, so changing the land use designation from linear park / I-90 to town center, and changing the zoning designation from P public institution to town center with the sub-area designation of TC5, and then updating a number of our maps through the 19.11 in our code. That 19.11 is the chapter that regulates town center development on that property. So this would be an amendment for consistency. Just to give a little bit further clarity as to where these 2 map amendments are, the first, of course, here on the screen is the Mercer Island Community and Event Center. The area that's roughly clouded in red here is the Kite Hill designation. You'll see there is a white line that runs east-west on the north end of that graphic above the red cloud. I'll see if I can get the cursor to pop up right through here. That is currently the edge of the park designation. And what we're amending on this map is to bring that park designation down and essentially follow the inside, the westerly edge of the trail, and actually some drainage improvements down here by the parking lot, changing that to a park designation. This would be the second map amendment. The area highlighted in red is the city-controlled property that was dedicated to the city of Mercer Island from WashDOT a number of years ago, dedicated for street and road purposes. It's currently improved with a mix of uses, as you can see on the drawing or on the graphic here. We have existing lawn or grassy area, trees, and then of course 2 driveways crossing that property, serving the Freshies development to the southwest. When we are looking at a proposed comprehensive plan amendment, there are a number of criteria that the council has adopted into our code in evaluating whether or not that comprehensive plan amendment should be approved ultimately. This is the first set of criteria, and these apply to all amendments but are specific really to the text amendments, the first 3 that I described. And here what we're really looking at is that the amendment is consistent with the Growth Management Act, it's consistent with the countywide planning policies, it's consistent with other policies or provisions within our current comprehensive plan, and we're either correcting a technical area or we're addressing a changing circumstance. Any questions before I move on to the second? For the map amendments, the comprehensive plan map amendments, we have 3 additional criteria. The first is that the proposed map amendment is compatible with the adjacent land use and development patterns. The second, that the property is suitable for development in conformance with the standards of the underlying zone or the zone that would result from the change. And the third is that the amendment will benefit the community as a whole and will not create a deficiency, if you will, in public health, safety, or general welfare. So the Planning Commission reviewed the proposed comprehensive plan amendments on October 4th and concurred with a staff recommendation that we approve, if you will, to the City Council, the proposed text amendments, the 3 that I described a moment ago, and the proposed land use map amendment for Kite Hill. So those 4 amendments together, there was relatively little discussion, frankly, on October 4th around those amendments. Planning Commission did not recommend approval of the proposed cone amendment. The staff did recommend approval, and I'd like to expand on the difference there, if you will, for just a moment or two. So the Planning Commission's recommendation is contained within the agenda bill text. I actually worked with the Vice Chair in this, drafting the Planning Commission recommendation, which is on the bottom of page 2 in your text. I believe this most accurately captures their recommendation. Of course, I've just summarized it on the screen for this evening. I think the Planning Commission has articulated a couple of different reasons as to why they did not end up supporting the cone amendment. The first is that there wasn't a clear public benefit in the eyes of the Planning Commission to this proposed map amendment. The second was that the development development of that site would eliminate the park-like open space, or there was a concern to that effect. Third concern was that really any future development on that site should have a gateway aspect or gateway improvement related to the town center entry point, as we heard described by Mr. Cohn earlier this evening. There was also some concern, some question about how that site could be used or developed or better integrated into our town center plan, which I think really led to the discussion around the last 2 bullets here. First, as a potential opportunity site for acquiring public open space, and then really just wanting or desiring additional planning or visioning work on this property prior to the change in designation. Staff recommendation to the Planning Commission and to the City Council is a little different. We are recommending that you approve the proposed amendment. The thought here is that when we look back at our criteria, we actually, in the opinion of your city staff, we meet all of the criteria that would be necessary for the City Council to act on this proposed amendment at this point. The first, we are addressing a changing circumstance. This property was dedicated from WashDOT to the City of Mercer Island for street and road purposes. It's not being used to that effect at this point. That is a changing circumstance that has occurred over a number of years. The proposed amendment is consistent with the designation and the zoning of abutting properties directly abutting. So, of course, the Freshies property, the property just to the southwest, and this would allow for development consistent with our town center comprehensive plan policies. And frankly, the last here is that we are clarifying the long-term intended use of the site, or allows the City Council to clarify the long-term intended use of the site by evaluating different opportunities or alternatives for use of the property. It's consistent with our town center policies in this area, and it addresses the current limitation on the property, which is really related to road and street purposes. So it gives us the opportunity to look at other types of uses on that site. I'll note for the record that changing the zoning here does not preclude use of this property as public open space or park use. It simply broadens the list of uses that the council could consider in their development. So with that, Deputy Mayor, I'd really look to the council. The current packet that you have in front of you reflects the staff recommendation to the council. If the council is not interested in taking the staff recommendation forward regarding the Cohen Amendment, I do need to make that change in order to bring this to you on December 5th. Otherwise, I would recommend that you set the ordinance as I've noted here on the screen. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, do you have questions? Wendy?
Yeah, thank you for that great summary. Can you tell me what the Planning Commission had in mind for potential opportunity site? Did they talk about different uses they might envision there?
As I understood the conversation around the potential opportunity site, it was really to designate that property for maybe more of a public open space long term. My recollection is that there was some discussion around leaving it as essentially grassy or park-like space, or possibly developing it as a public plaza in conjunction with a gateway improvement, if you will. But there wasn't really a defined outcome, if you will, that the Planning Commission articulated in terms of a recommendation I could recite to you, Councilmember. I think the thought here was really a desire to talk about that gateway treatment further and look at a very specific project, if you will. And there was a little bit of a disconnect, if I may, between the staff recommendation, which is really based on the criteria, and maybe where some of the planning commissioners were focusing.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Okay, so we can either take this in one big chunk, or we can take it piece by piece, if I understand correctly. Evan, do you have a recommendation?
My suggestion would be, I think unless I'm misunderstanding the council direction at the moment, I think the first 4 items are relatively straightforward, the 3 text amendments and the Kite Hill amendment. So my suggestion would be that you could take those as one item and then perhaps set the Cohen amendment out for further discussion and direction.
Okay. Is that amenable to the council? So that probably means then that we would need to somehow take the current existing motion that's in your packet and tweak it to pull what is being referred to as the Cohen Amendment, or alternatively, we keep the Cohen Amendment in and we take it all as one package. That's true, too. Well, let me take a temperature reading from council. Is there any discussion regarding the first 4 amendments? Okay, great. So why don't we then, to Dan's point, go ahead and move and have a conversation around the Cohen Amendment. Council, any questions, discussions?
It would be helpful if you had a motion on the table before discussion.
I'm not sure what the motion would be for the first one.
What I would suggest then is we go ahead and take the motion as is, get a second, and then we can discuss the Cohen portion of it.
Carrie, we don't need to have a motion to have a discussion. We're just talking about it, and then we can, there's one motion. We want to adopt the staff motion, so we're just trying to work our way to get to that point. You haven't given us more than one motion to consider. So there isn't, the only motion that's there is the one we're trying to get to, but we got to have a discussion first on whether we're going to modify that to deal with something different on the Cohen Amendment.
We can get there. We can either then come back and modify the existing motion, or we can go ahead and have the discussion specifically first. I think we're going to have a conversation about Cohen irrespective. It's a question whether or not the council wants to table or put forth a motion up front. Look, I'm not seeing a great passion to do so why don't we go ahead and just hit the...
Well, I mean, it's more procedural. I mean, that's fine. I mean...
We don't have to have a motion. So why don't we... I'm going to recommend, for the sake of clarity, we have a motion. And then we can go back and...
It's just helpful to frame the discussion,
All right,
frankly.
I move that we set ordinance numbers 17-23 and 17C-24 for second reading and adoption on December 5th, 2017.
Second.
Okay. We have a first and a second. Discussion.
So, question or discussion? Discussion. Question. The difference between TC5 and parks, isn't that significant? And the
Parks are public, right?
The public I-90, the linear, where's the language there for the I-90, the designation that it is now and changing it to TC5 doesn't actually change what can be done there. We can plant trees, we can put park benches, we can have a gateway statue in either designation.
You could do.
Seems to be speaking into the microphones.
You can't hear me? Okay. Evan, could you please differentiate what the current designation is now, what could be done there versus what could be done with TC5 designation?
So the P public institution zoning designation on that site right now would typically limit the types of uses on that property to things you might expect in a public institution zone. Parks would be included, public facilities, the I-90 corridor, for example. Things of that nature would fit into our P zoning designation. Schools. The change to the town center, the TC5 zoning designation, the 5 being a sub-area, would allow for those uses and additional options for the city council to consider in your disposition of the property. So it would also allow, if the council decided to sell the property for development as a retail project with the adjacent property, which I think is one of the things that that property owner might be interested in. It would allow for multifamily use, would allow for a list of land use designations beyond what the P public institution zone would allow for. You're not, as best I can determine, you're not limiting your options by amending the zoning designation. You're actually providing yourself with more options to consider.
So it increases our flexibility with that part.
It increases your flexibility, yes.
Dan?
One nitpick. On page 7 of the agenda bill, section 1, you call it the City of Mercer Island controlled property. Why wasn't just the City of Mercer Island owned property, since the city does own that property?
At the time I drafted the language here, the city controlled has been an intentional use really for the past month or so. It wasn't clear to me how the property had been conveyed to the city initially. It's, of course, now we have the quitclaim deed in hand, and I've traced that out more accurately, but that's where that controlled term came from.
So it could be, I mean, technically should be owned, I assume?
You could certainly characterize it as owned.
So that's the second question is, sometimes dealing with other requirements, potentially federal requirements, if there's an issue of if you get rid of parkland or eliminate what they consider parkland, you have to replace it with other parkland. I'm curious whether, given that we happen to be redesignating or designating Kite Hill, which, by the way, I still don't know where the name Kite Hill came from, but that's another issue. But should we be maybe linking those two in some way to make it clear that if someone later says that you took linear parkland and there's not a net loss issue? I mean, I'm wondering if whether that makes some sense to even link it in the ordinance to make it clear that if anyone questions down the road, that we want to get credit for what we're doing up on Kite Hill.
So I think if that's the council direction, we can certainly link this in the ordinance. I'm not aware of a requirement to, but that may be part of your policy direction, and I can happily include that in your whereas statements.
I'm just thinking it doesn't do any harm, and it may, if the question comes up down the road, on something that might happen on the parcel at 24th and 76. It just protects us down the road.
Carrie, any comment?
I'm sorry, apologize. I didn't hear the question.
I'm discussing about whether or not, in the event that there's an eventual use for the parcel at the corner of 76th and 24th, and past practices being that if you change the purpose of current parkland, you have to repurpose additional land somewhere else to serve as parkland.
It's not designated as parkland currently. It's my understanding it's designated public institution.
Right, so the question was, would we do this? Is there anything we need to do preemptively to make sure that this question or this current concern doesn't come up in the coming years?
I'm just concerned about this quote-unquote linear park, which I have no idea where that term comes from. But if for example, FHWA has some role in this whole process, I would hate to have them come back a year from now or whenever and say, well, you can't do something with this quote-unquote linear park without having a no net loss situation, so you got to replace it with other parkland. And all I'm suggesting is that since we happen to be redesignating Kite Hill as park property, maybe in this ordinance we should just link it now, so we just sort of avoid a future fight with somebody that there's not a no net loss situation.
I do understand the question. I don't feel that I have a complete answer at this time because I'm not sure if FHWA would take a position about this particular parcel. We do know that the city has ownership of this parcel through a quitclaim deed. This was a remnant parcel left over from WashDOT's acquisition of right-of-way for I-90. And so this particular parcel was quitclaim deeded to the city. There is a deed restriction saying that it is for road street purposes. So how it's referred to on the map is, I believe, a matter of local concern, that designation, and that for zoning purposes, it's public institution. So the park no net loss policy would not apply to this, arguably. So that's my preliminary thinking about it, just so the council's aware. I think it's a matter of local concern based on how we zone it. And currently, it's public institution.
My only concern, Carrie, is I have this vague recollection that and it came up on the sculpture garden, the sculpture park. There's somewhere, there's something in the back of my mind which says we have to be careful whenever you repurpose any of that property.
I'm not sure about the facts that you're describing about the Greta Hackett Outdoor Sculpture Gallery. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, that's where it came up, I think.
I am familiar with the Washington State Recreation and Conservation Office having policies about no net loss, RCO, and we've used RCO grant monies in some of our parks. Perhaps if Paul West is here, he might be able to speak to this better than I can, but RCO does often have policies where there's a no net loss, and we can even jeopardize our grant funding if we violate any of the RCO restrictions. But I'm not familiar with any grant money being at issue with regard to this parcel. Again, it was quitclaim deeded to the city. There is a deed restriction, but it's otherwise reflected in our zoning map as public institution.
And I guess all I'm suggesting is we put in a whereas clause saying if there's any future question as to whether any future question as to whether this was park property and you had to replace it, then Kite Hill should be considered as the credit for that. And that's all I'm suggesting.
And as a placeholder, I think that that's a prudent approach in the event that no net loss policy were to apply. Again, I just can't speculate as to the likelihood of it applying, but it's definitely a good placeholder.
So given that we're in first reading right now and we're anticipating a second reading, does it make, in the city attorney's opinion, is this something that we would want to include as an edit or amendment before we proceed to the second reading?
I believe I understand the direction that I'm hearing about wanting to explore that further, so I will explore it further between now and second reading and come back at second reading with a recommendation.
Are you comfortable with that?
Deputy Mayor Bertland, is it, and so there is agreement among the council to go ahead and amend the ordinance to include such language? Just want to make sure that...
Well, is it to amend it or to explore the amendment?
Well, we would include language for you to consider.
Okay, my understanding was that the process would be that the city attorney would research the extent to which it was needed. Based on her findings, it would then be included or not, depending on...
I'm not asking Carrie to research anything. I'd rather she just put language in there, and then it just covers us down the road, rather than take the time to figure out what possible requirement may apply. Just cover ourselves.
It's preemptive.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so now, I guess, following up on the city manager's comments, it would be helpful to know if a majority of the council agrees with that.
Okay. So I think we just need to do a thumbs up on this, don't we, Ally? Or do we need a formal?
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up?
General direction.
Okay, so council's providing direction to include that preemptive element. Great. Okay, so I think we're still back to comments or questions. Anyone else? In that case, I do have a question, Evan, and it's one it's a procedural question. If we were not to move forward with the Cohen amendment tonight, when would be the next opportunity for council to change that zoning? Would that be 2018?
It would be 2018 as part of your comprehensive plan amendments.
Okay. So any action not taken tonight essentially represents at least a one-year delay. Okay. Good. So with that, any other comments, questions? People ready to go ahead and vote on the motion as it currently exists? Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Evan. The next item of regular business is AB 5346, the settlement agreement between the City of Mercer Island and the Central Puget Sound Regional Transit Authority, or Sound Transit, for the East Link project. Welcome, City Manager Julie Underwood.
Good evening, Council. Julie Underwood, your City Manager, along with Carrie Sand, City Attorney. So we're pleased to present the I-90 settlement agreement for your approval this evening. It's really pretty much in line with what was presented back in June, and so the details of that is in the attached agreement, but let's review that with you, and I'm going to ask well, let me start by first saying, when you went into the negotiations, you heard from the community around kind of what to negotiate in any mitigation settlement agreement. Residents definitely wanted access to Island. I think maybe even at the time when you were putting together these principles, Island Crest Way was still a possibility, and so we wanted to continue to maintain that and maintain the HOV access. You wanted to limit and mitigate traffic that would be impacting our town center. You wanted to improve commuter parking, specifically for MI residents. You wanted to improve last and first mile connections, as well as minimize the impacts of that bus rail intercept, the bus rail regional bus operations coming to the island. And you wanted to make sure we had safe, convenient ped and bicycle access to the station. So I checked off everything I feel like we were able to accomplish, and obviously I know the community is very disappointed we weren't able to secure the HOV for single occupant vehicles. Even today, it is, I know, quite disappointing to drive past Island Crestway knowing that really the only way you can access that on-ramp is if you're HOV. So this, because it is a federal issue, and it was clear as we were going through the litigation that we were not going to really secure that through any discussions with WashDOT or Sound Transit. We knew that was something we were going to have to put that aside. I know it is still a council legislative priority to continue to pursue that, and I think I reported back this summer the heavy lift that would be involved in securing that access. So unfortunately, this agreement does not secure that access. So any questions about that? And let me put it, let me be frank, even though we feel we've accomplished these things, the specifics of those things, as noted in your public testimony tonight, is still things we have to work out with our community. So, and we are very committed to working with our community on all those things. So I'm going to ask Carrie if she'll review the terms of the agreement.
Good evening. So as Julie stated, this agreement very much fleshes out all of the deal points that were agreed between the city and Sound Transit back on May 31st. These are the same deal points that the Sound Transit Board approved at their June board meeting. And what the agreement does is it really just fleshes out how it's all going to work. But for everyone's benefit, I just wanted to recap what the main financial deal points are. So in the category of traffic safety enhancements and ped bike impacts, Sound Transit will fund and construct all mitigation that's already required of them in the FEIS and addendum. This was actually, I believe, a comment raised about this during appearances, and it's true that they are committed to do that. That's not something additional. It's something they were already committed to do. But in addition to that, they are also providing reimbursement of up to $5.1 million for traffic safety enhancements. This is a very broad category, and it can include, but is not limited to, intersection improvements, signage, traffic calming devices, crosswalks. We will be engaging our transportation consulting experts, as well as our in-house experts, and the community to determine exactly what improvements might be needed. Unused funds may be transferred to last mile solutions, and it's often referred to as last or first mile solutions. It just means facilitating people to the public transit without driving. In addition, there's $50,000 earmarked for the Aubrey Davis Park Master Plan. And if there's any funding left over, that can be put towards implementation of the plan. So in total, this is $5.1 million worth of reimbursable expenditures. And as far as last mile solutions go, in partnership with King County Metro, Sound Transit will be working with the city to implement, again, first and last mile solutions to get our residents to transit without having to use their cars. We have $226,900 earmarked for that. The settlement agreement also addresses bus rail integration, and the 77th Avenue Southeast configuration was the preference of the council. We have a letter that we've obtained from King County Metro that confirms that they will partner with the city and Sound Transit to see the 77th Avenue Southeast configuration to fruition. And it just, as noted in these bullet points, consistent with what we heard from the community during the 2015 listening tour, that there will be no pickup or drop-off on 80th Avenue Southeast, that bus volumes on North Mercer Way will remain consistent with current volumes today, and that they will not use 27th to circulate in the town center unless they are an MI-only local bus. And the city is going to be working with King County Metro to refine even further how bus rail is integrated. And so we will be talking with them about bus layovers, idling of buses, and hopefully their fleet will be moving more and more towards 100% electronic battery-powered buses. So then idling won't be an issue. So that's what they're moving towards. Here is a depiction of the 77th Avenue Southeast configuration. This is taken out of the SEPA addendum and just as a good visual of what we're going to be working towards in the coming years. With regard to parking, this was a huge subject of the negotiations, and we heard a lot of input from the community about this. We are going to continue to work on securing parking in the short term during the construction period between now and 2023, the anticipated opening of light rail. We are going to try to come back to the council very soon because by January 1, that's our goal, we'd like to identify up to 100 stalls within a third-mile walk shed of the existing Mercer Island Park and Ride. And we have earmarked $240,000 towards leases in the short term for that purpose. In the long term, we are hoping to secure up to 200 stalls for one or more city-led structured parking projects. Sound Transit's financial contribution is capped at 49%. In other words, they want to maintain a minority share contribution towards long-term parking. So that would mean the city share would have to be 51% of the actual reasonable construction cost per stall. $4.41 million has been earmarked for this purpose. One of the major benefits from the council's perspective, again based on feedback from the community, is that there could be resident-only parking during commuter hours, and any unused funds for this portion may be transferred to the traffic safety enhancements. Conversely, if there's any traffic safety enhancement money that goes unused, that can be transferred towards parking. That was another major goal of the council in negotiating the settlement agreement, was that there be flexibility. Frankly, putting it very simply, we wanted the ability to be able to spend all $10,050,000, not leaving one penny unspent. So we tried to ensure flexibility. With regard to training, there's $23,100 earmarked for reimbursement of public safety personnel training for I-90 emergency response, in particular in the tunnels, but anywhere along I-90. For Aubrey Davis Park, as I noted earlier, we hope to implement a master plan, and the total mitigation package is valued at $10,050,000, but it's really important to note the agreement is not indefinite. It has an end date, and all invoices must be submitted to Sound Transit by December 31st, 2025 to be eligible for reimbursement, or else the funds are forfeited. So we really need to be focused and try to get as much community input as we can and be very deliberate in how this money is spent and make sure it's spent in a timely manner.
And finally, Council, we ask for you to adopt Resolution Number 1533 and authorize us to execute this agreement with Sound Transit. I think it is important to note 8 years seems like a long time, but it goes very quickly, and you have a lot you want us to implement as part of this agreement. So we're anxious to begin working with our community to implement and really have this benefit our entire community.
Thank you, Julie. Council, if you will bear with me, I'd like to just take a little bit of privilege here, because I think for all that it's a small group of people here tonight, this is a fairly momentous occasion, at least for a lot of people who've spent a lot of time working on it over the years. And I'd like to just call out some of those people. First of all, of course, our Mayor Bruce Bassett, who is not here. Former council member Jeff Sanderson, who put in many hours during his tenure. Of course, we have previous and interim city managers, Pam Bissonette, Steve Lancaster, who definitely put blood, sweat, and tears into this, as well as our lobbyist, Tony Williams, his team, and our legal counsel, Harrington Lay. I also, of course, do want to call out quite publicly the support, actually the tremendous support that we got from Adam Smith, Judy Kliber and Tana Sen, Lisa Wellman, Claudia Balducci, and many others who are working both in front of and behind the scenes. It was a monumental effort, and I think they deserve some degree of recognition. I would also call out that this really has been the culmination of many years of work that's gone on, that I'm very pleased to see you weigh the agreement relative to the negotiating principles that the community had outlined back in the fall of 2015. In some ways it feels like it was much longer ago than 2 years ago. In some ways it feels like it was just a few weeks. The agreement, it was hard fought, arguably hard won, depending on your perspective here. It took politics, it took pragmatism, it took data, and it took many, many hours. So I want to make sure that we also commend our staff for the tremendous effort, the tremendous lift. It's the people, again, here, of course, that we have. We've got Carrie and Julie, Kirsten, Allie, but there's so many other people who were back there in those offices working some crazy hours with some real intensity. And I don't want to lose, again, the opportunity to recognize what an incredible effort and staff we have in helping us conclude this agreement. And as Julie called out, we still have a big piece left, and that's Island Crest Way, and that is not going to be fast, and nor is it going to be easy. I'm not sure anybody who's dealing with D.C. at this point in Congress would find anything straightforward, so we're not alone. But unfortunately, it's still out there, and I personally don't feel ready to give in on that one. Finally, just a couple more points. One of the really critical elements of this agreement was the ability to move funds across those different buckets. It was understood what the community's priorities were, but equally that there would be an evolution of those priorities, both in terms of what we want to see and what we can logically or rationally achieve within some of the limitations that we have. So I think that serves our community well in terms of moving money back and forth as we need, as the community determines through a very robust outreach program, which has been at least outlined for us. So with that, wow, here we are. I'm pretty happy to be here tonight, and wonder if the council has any questions or comments that they'd like to add. Benson?
Well, first of all, I echo Deputy Mayor's compliments to the staff and to the outside consultants that we had. I do have some questions, and maybe for the city manager, maybe in the short term that you can, if not now, but soon, give us an update, certainly on the efforts that Sound Transit has as far as locating these short-term parking spaces. Obviously, this January deadline continues to get pushed. Originally, they were supposed to, I think, locate these 100 spaces in August. And again, it keeps on getting pushed. So anyway, if you could track that down, that'd be helpful. The other thing is, I know that, well, maybe I don't know, but I believe that you have had conversations with Metro and with Uber and Lyft with respect to the first mile solutions, or at least ideas. I think that would be helpful. I think the community is very much interested in knowing what is going on there. And then my only other comment is simply for the city attorney, that perhaps the community would like to have you weigh in, describe the litigation aspects of the settlement agreement, the dismissal. I didn't recall you saying that or discussing that, so that might be something that people might be interested in, or at least the lawyers might be interested in. So.
Go ahead and answer.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Wong. We'll take your questions out of order. So I'll go first. With regard to the legal settlement and where we go from here, next steps are that we will be following up with all of the various litigants, including WashDOT, who is not a party to the settlement agreement. It's because Sound Transit is obligated as between Sound Transit and WashDOT to fund the mitigation. And so we will be following up with all litigants to have entered a stipulated order of dismissal. And so that will happen in all the different venues where we have litigation pending, which includes King County Superior Court, the Washington State Supreme Court, and the Central Puget Sound Growth Management Hearings Board. We did originally aim to bring this settlement agreement to council for approval last month. We missed that mark. And so we had to file joint status reports indicating to the various venues that we would be following up within 30 days. So we will be following up, and this will conclude all of the pending litigation.
So regarding last and first mile solutions, we have a tentative study session set for November 7th, and so that is where I've invited Uber and Lyft to come and talk about their proposal that they would offer our community. It really is meant to be truly a study session, no decisions, but to just have you kind of weigh in on that and see if that's something you would like to invest in and whether or not the community would like to invest in. I will say along with that, though, we will be preparing a survey that will go out to hopefully all of our commuters, so whether they're commuters that use our buses, whether they are single occupant, or they want to access the park and ride. It's a pretty comprehensive survey on how our residents commute. So one of the things we want to determine is, would there be a an appetite for using Uber or Lyft? And the way that would be looked at is something like where the city would subsidize, so there might be a flat fee, for example, to get you from your home to the park and ride, and then the city would subsidize the difference. So that would be something you would talk about and how you might want to do that. So it's a flat fee, somewhere in the $3 range, $2 range. It just kind of depends. And I'm trying to get Lyft to come at the same time, just to have them side by side. And of course, made it clear that we don't want to have a non-compete. I'd want both of them to be available for our residents, should they choose. The other piece on short-term parking, I know that we are really kind of down to the wire on identifying locations. The council wanted more information regarding Luther Burbank South parking lot, so we're coming back with some more data and information on that option. But we really are limited on the options we're able to identify, especially in the town center. But hopefully we'll have that sometime. I think we might be looking at November 7th as well, coming back for that. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Dave?
Two quick ones. First, echoing again the thanks, because I think if you were not in the process, you don't recognize what a Herculean effort it was on the part of staff, and particularly Carrie. I mean, you sort of spent an entire career all bundled up in an 18-month period, and Julie to jump in as the very first thing as you walked off the boat was fantastic. So thanks, everyone, for that. Two quick questions. One is in the commuter outreach. Would also want to talk to the cycling community, Neighbors in Motion, and Cascade, because that's a particular pain point on the east-west. So I think those groups would have a great opinion on the redesign of that east-west nightmare corridor that we have today. And then the second question is, I know that we have sound mitigation provisions in the agreement during construction with Sound Transit, but I don't know that those exist for the operational, post-construction operational period. And given the public comments of the neighbors that are going to be adversely impacted or maybe adversely impacted, do we have a way to measure, mitigate something for that neighborhood if it turns out that there is a greater deal of noise and disruption than anticipated? And that may not be something you can answer tonight. I understand.
Yeah, it's our intention, at least I know I feel this way, that I would want to work with Sound Transit and Metro early on in the design on that roundabout. I think at this point they haven't even really designed it more than what you've seen in the renderings in the report. So before they get too far down the road of kind of 30, 50, 60% design, we'd want to talk with our community and make sure that they're including the feedback from our community on that design. Sound Transit will be responsible for constructing the roundabout and securing property if they have to for that. But again, I think we can be advocates on behalf of our residents in that early design phase. And I intend to.
Any other questions? Wendy?
Yeah, I'll just say I'm glad that we've crossed this threshold and we have an agreement and we can move forward with the $10 million. And I would remind us, too, that we should thank our citizens for being patient with us for the 18 months that we had to deliberate with 5 different jurisdictions, and it felt like a lot of it was not transparent and not obvious. So we had a petition of 3,000 signatures coming through because folks were upset about how that process played out for them. So I would welcome Sound Transit to come back and have some public meetings and some public outreach to sort of build some bridges there and let everyone know what they're doing, when they're doing it. I've seen Eastlink updates kind of around town, off island. It would be great to have them back to share not only the roundabout, but the station design and parking and when Bellevue's going to open and kind of just updates to kind of keep our citizens informed as well, and not just through our channels, but definitely through their outreach. And then I'll just say I really hope we can stick to a schedule and stay focused on getting that $10 million spent. 8 years goes really fast when you're talking about parking projects and last mile connections and new technologies and apps. Adopting it, getting it out there, getting people to use it, that's going to be gone in a New York minute, and we need to make sure we don't leave any penny on the table, particularly because a lot of our citizens are feeling cheated from the agreements from many decades past. So thank you for the great work. Congratulations, everyone that was involved. Thank you for all the consultants that came in, worked crazy hours. It was money well spent. Let's make sure we can get it done by 2025 when that train starts running.
Question, just when I was reminding myself of some of the terms in the agreement, there is 15 hours a week, I believe, coming from Sound Transit staff to work on the community outreach. Do we know when that starts and what that looks like?
Well, as soon as you allow us to execute the agreement, we will start immediately.
Starts tonight.
Hounding them about that, and obviously they are trying to cooperate with us. And I know that it was a bitter fight there for a while, but I think now I feel they're being certainly very cooperative and want to work with us. So. Yeah, we could use that relief.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay, I'd entertain a motion.
Can I?
Sorry, okay, go ahead.
So, I don't know if this is questions or statements, right? It seems like everybody's blended the two. I was appointed after this was more or less negotiated. And so, obviously, I can't congratulate myself on the hard work. I know you guys put a lot of effort into getting this where it was. But I think I approached the agreement from a different set of eyes, and it's really the lens of the work that is in front of us. This agreement is a roadmap for many hundreds, maybe thousands of hours of planning, meeting, public engagement, improvements, awareness, identification of safety risks, and mitigation. When you say that loss of I-90 to the RA8A lanes is a council priority, legislative priority, that's a priority for you, your office, your staff. We know that as a city we're not going to give up on that effort. And that's a big factor for this community. We talked about traffic concurrency last week, or a week before last week, and we think about the 27th corridor through our town. We look at the East Mercer and West Mercer ways and the flows of traffic that are now accessing I-90 where they probably went through Island Crest Way before. This $5 million of mitigation is very much for that. And identifying it, being smart about trends and understanding that traffic is not static and it does change and people's behavior changes, and looking at the studies that we're doing now as opposed to the studies we did over the summer when people are on vacation and they're traveling in different patterns and that people are getting used to new flows and new schedules and new work arrangements, that all of these things play into the work that is ahead of us. And I don't want people to confuse are being deliberate with not taking action. I don't know what the status of the traffic studies that we're doing right now are, when we might see that data, but that's going to be the first time we compare apples to apples, right? Post center lanes closing, one set of data that measured traffic flows and patterns and cut through and all of that, and then a secondary look at that. To me, the responsibility that I feel I have is to execute this agreement in light of all the hard work that you guys did, and that we make sure that we deliver to the community the best results we can from what effectively is $15 million, because we have matching, of comprehensive settlement funds. So I thank you for the hard hours. I can't even understand what that means because I wasn't there. I've heard rumors about it. It sounds very unpleasant. I hope I don't have to go through that, but I'm willing to do it. But I will commit to the community that we'll spend this money wisely, deliberately, and to mitigate and improve what it is that we have out there.
Say something else.
Dan?
So I was not sure I was going to say anything, but I was listening to Salim, just made me realize that probably there was a couple words worth saying. I'm obviously going to vote for this tonight, so that's not an issue. As I think I said in one of the summaries I distributed to the Islanders, time will tell whether this is a good settlement, but it's, in my mind, it is the best settlement that we could have hoped to achieve under the circumstances that we found ourselves. But I think, I try to reflect back on how we got to where we got to, and we started out with a 1976 MOA, and which was exactly the right agreement for the time that it was signed, and the technology that existed, and the traffic patterns, and the way our region was at that time. And then we had the 2004 amendment, which, again, I think at the time was the right thing to do, and made all the sense in the world given what we knew then and what we had been promised then. So now we're in 2017, and you compare 2017 to 2004 or 1976, and so much has changed. And so we're envisioning things, or not just envisioning, things are happening now which no one could have thought about back in 76 or 2004. No one would have envisioned this region would have grown the way that it has over the past few years, and that traffic patterns would be as they are, as bad as they are. So I think that the challenge for our community and therefore for the council is to recognize that the lens we have to look at the situation that we now confront has to be a lens that's a 2017 and next year a 2018 lens. And to recognize that some of the things we took as a given probably aren't worth fighting for. And the one, Salim or someone else mentioned, the question of continued access to the HOV lanes. And I fought as hard for that as anyone on this council, and wished it had come out differently. But I now look at this thing and say, is that the best use of council or city resources in the months and years ahead? And should we be continuing to beat that drum when I think, given what we are now seeing on the ground, it's probably never going to happen again. I just think it's important that, as Salim said, we've got money that's available to make a difference, but it has to be spent in a way which takes into account the situation we now confront with current technology, with current traffic patterns, and with the knowledge that there will be a train going through here in 6 years, and knowing and that I'm hopeful that this council doesn't get distracted on things which I think will end up being dead ends, unfortunately, given where we're at, and instead really focuses on what's the world of the possible, and does it in a way which really always tries to look 5-10 years ahead, because I think there's some really interesting opportunities there.
Okay, any last words? Well, there'll never be last words on Sound Transit. We know that. But with that, I think I'd go ahead and entertain a motion. Who wants to take it?
The manager to execute the settlement agreement between the City of Mercer Island and the Central Puget Sound Regional Transit Authority, Sound Transit, for the East Link project in substantially the form attached as Exhibit A to Resolution Number 1533.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none? It passes. Wow. In some ways, it's a little bit of a letdown. In some ways, it's a huge relief. Great. So with that, we now move on to other business, including council member absences. Is there a motion to excuse Mayor Bassett?
What's he doing?
He's in Africa right now, I believe.
No excuse.
No excuse? Thank you. All right, great. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Any upcoming council member absences to report?
I will be out November 21st.
Okay. Anyone else? Great. Okay, with that, handing it back over to City Manager Julie Underwood for the planning schedule.
Council, if I can call your attention to, we have a special joint meeting with our school district next week, October 26th, 5 o'clock right here in the council chamber. Also want to note for the public, we're changing our November 7th meeting to November 6th because November 7th is election evening. We think that might be difficult to get your attention. So it will be back to Monday, November 6th. We're also adding on that agenda an executive session as well at, is council agreeable to 5 p.m. executive session? Is that okay? No objection? Great.
You know, Julie, just one thing to look at that. If you look at that November 7th, that's a very light agenda. You might want to, I mean, depending on what transpires between now and then, you might want to have a longer executive session than move the study session a little bit later, so we're not jamming.
That's a good point. Starting that more like at 7?
Well,
or
yeah, starting the study session later and just
later.
leaving us enough time so we can really.
So the study session could be during the normal 7 o'clock period.
Yeah, we could just start.
What do we see? You see how the agenda builds. If that
Actually,
works.
I was just noted there's going to be another item on your agenda for the executive session, so it would be helpful to have a 2-hour executive session just planned.
Okay.
So executive session tentatively from
For
5
5
until
to 7. Mm-hmm.
And then moving the study session into into the regular business.
Right.
Or
That's
within
what I'm
that framework
thinking.
of-
Yeah, right. Let's see. And then, something, I don't know if you have it on your agenda. I have an older copy, but we do have we're doing something different this year. And it's on November 28th, where we've invited our delegation to have dinner with us to talk about our legislative priorities and to really get their insights on what they believe the next upcoming session in Olympia is going to look like. And so really pleased to announce that Representative Claiborne and Sen will be available. Unfortunately, our senator is out at a conference and won't be able to join us, but we'll update her when she returns. So plan on that evening, November, it's a Tuesday evening? Yes, November 28th at 6 to 7:30.
And what leads up to that? So will we be seeing a draft of last year's
Most likely, you'll see last year's priorities, and then I believe we have in December where you're going to discuss your draft priorities.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's all I wanted to note.
So, Julie, I don't see the December. Oh, I see it. Never mind. I see it on November 21st. Never mind.
And we're going to have a big party for you on December 5th. We think you hold the record for the longest serving elected
in the history of America.
Yeah. I actually thought we'd just have the meeting on December 19th and just dedicate the entire meeting to that.
To reading your accomplishments.
Hey, Julie, I'm not seeing the time for the joint school board meeting. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's at 5 p.m.
Got it.
I believe they convene into their regular business meeting
Afterward.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Any other feedback on the planning calendar? Okay, so we have council member reports. We're going to start with Dave.
So my report is from the utility board. So we talked about rate increases, which will come to us shortly, and I probably uncharacteristically will be in favor of it. They've got some significant deficiencies that they're trying to cover, and one is the SCADA system. SCADA system is our early warning system that manages our sewer system, and it is of great age. In fact, I will put a little context in the back of your brain, so when they come to us, you will have this. The age of the system is such that the monitoring devices we put on the pumps themselves, we're buying off of eBay, because they are not only hard to get, they are not manufactured and not stocked anywhere. Another example is the keyboard that we use to interface with the system is a Spanish language keyboard, because one in English, American English, can't be found, period. So when we talk about things that are out of date, this is on a whole new level. And this is our warning system to tell us when things have gone wrong. And as an island that understands when sewage treatment goes wrong and how expensive that can be, I think this comes to the forefront. So that's one of the big expenditures and the drivers for that. So they'll be coming to us shortly.
Thank you. Dan?
So what is the Spanish keyboard?
It's just like, depending on your language, your keyboard's laid out differently.
Okay. No, nothing special.
Okay, Celine? Wendy? Benson?
Yeah, I just have a few things. On October 11 was kind of busy. So on October 11, I attended a forum for half a day. Unfortunately, I had to leave, but staff members were there for a while. It was a forum sponsored by the Puget Sound Regional Council that included panels focused on the developers' perspectives on TODs. And so they discussed and shared a number of different TOD projects throughout the region. And so it just provided some insight as far as what folks are looking in terms of parking and costs. But anyway, it was rather enlightening. And again, I think we had Evan was there, Allison was there, so we had a number of people that were there the entire time. Also attended a Mercer Chamber of Commerce meeting that day, and saw our city manager and Chip Corder, our finance director, give a good presentation, well-received presentation about the financial challenges that the city is facing. They received a number of questions, and it probably was good practice for you before you went into the telephone town hall. And lastly on that day, the schools, I went to the IMS, and they had a welcoming event for new families. And it was great because you had the police department there, you had PTA, various PTA organizations and different service organizations, athletic clubs there, basically welcoming new families. And so it was a good way for folks to figure out how to integrate themselves into our community. So it was a good affair, good reception.
A big crowd?
It was actually sizable. I'm not sure if it was as many as last year, but it was well attended. So, and that's
Great.
it.
As for myself, was at ETP. We'll be renewing that agreement. We did have a presentation on the pilot that they're going to be running on vehicle miles traveled, which is in contrast to the gas tax, which I think is going to be interesting. And in true government form, The pilot runs in 18, the assessment is in 19, and the recommendation goes to the legislature in 20, so that there would be potential action in 21. So obviously, no big urgent moves going on there. The other interesting part is the Transportation 2040 through PSRC, I believe, is going to be released in some shape or form for public comment in December, which I think will be interesting. As a note, I believe it was 2020, actually had ferries showing up at some point back on Lake Washington, which I had seen at one point. So when it comes out, I'm going to find out if we're going to now revitalize the Roanoke landing on the north end of Mercer Island. So we'll see what kind of rumors I just started with that comment. With that, one thing I did miss on the agenda, there's no board appointments tonight. Otherwise, meeting is adjourned before 9 o'clock. Well, they give me the easier ones, right? Less room to